Hello and a very warm welcome to all our viewers who are joining me on this Facebook and YouTube live of News9 digital social media page as well. Every single day, COVID-19 is evolving into a completely different new subject altogether because new studies and new evidence have pointed out at the same fact. Because a few days back, we heard reports which suggested that the antibodies in COVID-19 recovered patients wouldn't last long. But in the latest report, according to a particular story that has transpired in the US, it seems like the protected people are those who recovered from COVID-19, and these people were saved from a major outbreak on a fishing vessel. So, three people who previously recovered from COVID-19 were protected during a major outbreak of the disease on board a fishing vessel that left from Seattle in the US. And this particular case study has offered the first confirmation that having antibodies are just enough to prevent a second wave of infection. And these findings were based on serological survey as well as the RT-PCR tests that were conducted before the vessel departed and upon its return as well. So you might be wondering what transpired and what the story actually was. Well, a vessel containing 122 crew members left for its voyage for 18 days. Of that, 104 members of the 122 crew members contracted the virus from a single source. And the attack rate on board was anywhere above 85%. And only 3 people who were part of this 122 crew team were protected from the COVID-19 outbreak. And this was because the initial serological screening also confirmed that they had neutralizing and spike reactive antibodies, and also in the follow-up tests as well, the same reports came out. And guess what? None of these crew members showed any evidence of bona fide viral infection or experienced any symptoms during the outbreak. So, cutting down the big story short, there were 120 crew members on board, 104 were infected, while sailing 16 were not infected. Out of these 16, 3 of them came in close contact with COVID-19 patients and they remained protected and they were not at all infected by COVID-19. So what does this mean? So in order to decode all of these incidents, let us now go over to our guest who is joining us on Skype, Dr. Sutesh Roy, who is also a very renowned pulmonologist from Mumbai. A very warm welcome for joining us on this live interaction, Mr. Sutesh Roy. So, like I told you and like you even read the report, 122 crew membered board vessel which left Seattle in the US. After it left on its 18-day voyage, a COVID-19 outbreak also was witnessed on the same vessel. In that, 104 of them were infected while 3 of them remained protected. So, could you give us an insight or rather clarity on this? Because a few days back, reports suggested that COVID-19 recovered patients wouldn't have their antibodies lasting long after they recover. But in this case, the antibodies lasted quite long enough to help him, survive the second wave as well, doctor.
So certainly, I think this is good news because this is what we call ground level news, real-time news that helps us understand how the antibodies are protecting an individual, because it's very hard in any ethical study to either take a person who's already been infected or someone who's getting vaccinated and expose them to the virus to see whether they will catch the infection or not. It's considered unethical to do that. And so in a real life scenario where these 3 people had the infection previously, had neutralizing antibodies to spike proteins in their blood detected, and when they were in the midst of a major outbreak where clearly there was a super spreader, because a super spreader is one who gives the infection to more than just 2 or 3 people like most people do.
Right.
And despite being in the midst and around people, 100 plus people who were infected, these 3 individuals with strong levels of neutralizing antibodies were protected, did not develop symptoms of COVID-19, and also their RT-PCR, which is the gold standard test, was negative. So I think that this is first real-time proof that people with good antibody levels can hope to be protected from a secondary infection or a reinfection. What we do know is that people respond in terms of their antibody levels very differently. Some people make a small amount of antibodies, some make more, some make a lot. And that's the part that we are still figuring out, and how the vaccines will play into that is really a question we are waiting to hear.
Also, Dr. Sutesh, I would like to ask you, how long do these antibodies last in a COVID-19 recovered patient, and does the rate of antibodies that last differ from person to person?
So to answer your first question, we know for sure from the studies that have already been published that for a period of 3 to 4 months, we know that antibody levels are sustaining in people's blood, those who have recovered from the infection. What we know from studying the old coronaviruses, which have been around since the 60s, is that somewhere around 3 to 4 months, in some people, the antibody levels start tapering off or dropping off because the memory immunity starts fading to some extent. But what we have to remember in this is that they also have something called cellular immunity, which is the T cells, which also very rapidly help in fighting the infection and are developed in a very specific way against COVID-19, which we currently don't have a way of routinely measuring except in research protocols. So while we know that somewhere around 3-4 months from the previous infection, the antibody levels can start declining in some people, and they tend to wane off around a year as per the studies from the old coronaviruses. There is still a lot that has to be seen and studied with regards to COVID-19 because it hasn't been a year since the early few patients got infected in China, and we are very eagerly looking forward to that data. But certainly for several months, it seems like most people hold up, but some people who respond weakly to begin with. So there are some people who respond differently to this virus, and people who have had an asymptomatic infection or people who have had a mild infection are usually the ones who tend to have weaker antibody titers. But that is also not 100% given. There have been some people with mild infection who developed a pretty strong antibody titer. So there is a lot that we are still learning about the virus, but it certainly seems like getting one infection can be to some extent and for a certain duration protective from the next one. And that's the hope that we all have as physicians. And that's the hope we have for all the patients out there who have recovered.
Also, doctor, I just want to clarify, does these patients stay protected when the antibody levels are at its peak after a particular person recovers from COVID-19? And as you pointed out rightly, after a year or so, the antibody rates, start waning away. So what happens if he contracts the second wave of infection while the antibodies are waning away?
So the first thing is the waning actually, as I mentioned, begins after 3 months or 4 months in some people. And by 1 year, it is at fairly low values in the old coronavirus infections.
Okay.
When this happens, there is still hope. Okay. It does not mean that the person is fully at risk of getting the infection because, as I said, there are two arms to the immune system, something called the humoral immunity and something called the cellular immunity. By antibodies, we are only measuring the humoral immunity. We are not measuring the cellular immunity. And there is a very good chance that the cells that are sitting in the lymph nodes, and you can call them as the black commando special ops forces who are hidden away, and when the virus surfaces as an enemy, they can get activated very quickly, and they can also activate whatever memory B cells are hanging around and make them produce a strong wave of antibody much faster than the person did probably the first time they got infected. So even for a person with waning antibodies, there is still hope that the cellular arm of their immune system will still have some protection. And there are studies going on about this to study both the antibody levels and the SARS-CoV-2 specific T cells in the blood of survivors and tracking them over time to see how they do over time and how long that protection lasts.
Okay, also, doctor, I would like to tell you that, good immune system helps us fight COVID-19. So is the vaccine development model also based on generating antibodies in a person?
Absolutely. So when a vaccine is given to whatever platform or technology the vaccine has been developed, whether it is a inactivated vaccine or it is an mRNA-based vaccine, or it is an adenovirus-based vaccine. All of these are designed to stimulate the cellular and the humoral immunity in a human being. And by doing so, we are able to provide them long-lasting immunity, hopefully. We do know from viruses like the influenza, where the virus changes itself, it mutates itself, and then the vaccine also has to be updated every year. But with SARS-CoV-2, we are seeing a much slower rate of transformation or mutation in this virus than we have seen in influenza before. But that's also an area of research.
Okay.
So through vaccination, we provide stimulation to both arms of the immune system, and we develop the memory base. That is why boosters are often given, and many of the vaccines, or several of the vaccines that are now in phase 3 trials, actually have a two-dose regimen where one dose is given and the second dose is given after 4 weeks to provide a boost to the immunity to develop a longer memory immunity that can then last for a long time. So vaccines very much work in almost the same way as the live virus does, except that we do not put the entire live virus into the vaccine. We put only portions of it that we feel are relevant, like the spike proteins, for example, which are important in warding off the infection in the earliest stage before it can set in and make home in the cells in the body.
Also, doctor, now with the vaccine being a very distant dream, what suggestions or rather what tips do you have for people who can maintain a good and battle-ready immune system?
So for this, the answer actually goes back to ancient medicine, where we are taught to eat healthy, sleep well for 6 to 8 hours at night, where we are taught to exercise and stay physically fit every day, try to eat as much of a fresh diet as we can, and try to get as much sunlight as we can, and maintain our vitamin D levels at a good level or take supplements for it. And through a healthy diet, a healthy lifestyle, exercise, good sleep, good hydration, drinking enough fluids throughout the day, certainly not having anything cold, because cold foods can lower our mucosal immunity in our respiratory and GI tract and make us more prone to infections. So when we follow some of these basic lifestyle rules, we can actually maintain our immunity at its best. And getting exercise for half an hour to an hour every day. And many people pre-COVID lockdowns didn't have time to exercise, and so now with the lockdown or with the stay-at-home suggestions and everything, people should have no excuse not to work out, even if it's just simple aerobics, exercise, sleep well, eat fresh, and they can really maintain a healthy immunity. And certainly there are supplements like zinc, vitamin C, vitamin D that have some benefit. They should not be overdone. They should not be excessively done. And sometimes even taking a steam inhalation or having some warm liquids once or twice a day can make a difference. There are a lot of natural supplements that are available outside. There are certain herbal teas that can help boost our immunity. So all of that, there's our age-old haldi and curcumin that have immune boosting and anti-inflammatory, antioxidant properties. So all of these things taken with discussion with your allergist, immunologist, doctor, physician, super specialist, whoever you are seeing, who has an understanding about your health. So taking all those precautions, taking all those care can certainly keep your immune system SARS-CoV-2 ready. And then you would be in that 40% group that get an asymptomatic infection and get well without any problems.
Right, doctor. Thank you for joining us with all those insights. Well, that was Dr. Sutesh Roy giving us insights on how you can maintain a good immune system, and that can be done by only, having a good amount of sleep hours on your watch, and also consuming good, fresh and hot food made at home, avoiding cold eatables outside, because this particular weather will also reduce the mucosal immune response, which is very important in warding off any fever or virus for that matter. So in order to stay safe, make sure your lifestyle habits are also healthy and avoid eating outside, and also most importantly, maintain a good personal and hand hygiene as well, because that is the only weapon that we have against fighting COVID-19. So until next time, please take care and stay safe.